Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. I have two authors here today, as you see, husband and wife. It is Dr. Dan and Bethany Meola, and they are the founders of the Catholic ministry LifeGiving Wounds, which is a ministry to help heal adult children of divorce. Add to that, you said some other extra words that made it even better, but that's basically the gist of the ministry, right?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, we just say Catholic ministry to adult children divorce separation because everything we do is in light of the great freedom and truth that the Catholic faith gives us.
Yeah. Well, I had you on the show before, and now you are authors of the book of the same title. Can you show our readers? That's Life-Giving Wounds, a Catholic Guide to Healing for Adult Children of Divorce or Separation. It is fantastic. I do know that the foreword in it is by my dear friend Layla Miller, and any of you that are into marriage realize she and I are ferocious fighters of marriage, as are Dan and Bethany. So I don't want to waste too much time on introductions because you've got a really great story and a really great book. So first of all, welcome to the show. Quick bio, guys, on not a bio, quick testimony on what is Life-Giving Wounds, why did you found it, and then let's get into how that book leads into it or was
Okay.
born from it.
Well, just a really quick clarification. Layla Miller endorsed the book. The foreword was actually done by Beth and Edward Suri. Just
That's why I told you to make me look good. Thank you for correcting me.
uh, really quick, why did we found Life Giving Wounds? Because we felt there's a very deep pastoral gap in the Catholic Church's ministries. We saw there's a lot for divorcees, but not the adult children divorce. So we wanted to step into that gap. Also, I'm adult child divorce, so I was aware of the need of it. And then our own research at the John Paul II Institute for Studies of Marriage and Family, where they were doing research on this question of the wounds of adult children divorce. All of those kind of led together, and the Holy Spirit then produced this ministry and this book. So that's kind of the quick Reader's Digest about how it
It
came
is.
via our ministry and the book.
And so the ministry includes retreats where people can come together and help get healed. And you have those in how many different dioceses right now?
So we're closing in on 20 locations throughout the country, and that's mostly dioceses, but some college campus ministries. Because we know at that for that age, college students are often grappling with these questions. The research shows it's often in young adulthood that children from divorce homes are really wanting to look at this. So we are on a few campus ministries too, and we're looking to grow quite a bit in 2024. So all of our chapters do retreats. We're rolling out a new support group curriculum based on our book in 2024. And then we do online ministry too. That kind of grew out of the pandemic when everything was shut down. That was when that was when we were going national as a ministry. So we started online ministry in 2020, and we're still doing that. So that reaches people nationally and internationally as well.
Yeah, and just shout out for viewers of this show. We're going to be doing an online support group starting February 29th during Lent. So if you're looking for support in this area, if there are wounds or things that come up during this show, we have resources for you in addition to our book.
And we will have a link to that right in the show notes so that if you're interested in at least learning about it, please just click on the link. Sometimes adult children of divorce are having that feeling that's unidentified, and as they parse it, realize, yeah, that was born out of my parents' divorce, and I divorced the two, the feeling from what was happening in my life, until you really look at it and realize that's where it's come from. But yeah, definitely look into it. These retreats, I've heard nothing but the most powerful healing stories. And so I'm glad we talked about that, but I really want to get to the book because you don't have to attend the retreat to read the book, and the book is a standalone. And tell me about what's in it. You got 7 different healing steps, healing,
Yeah.
what do you call them?
Well, we wouldn't call them steps necessarily because I think the Lord is like very creative in the way that He heals us, and He can take very different
Mhm.
pathways. But what we did was we identified 7 different areas you may have been wounded by your parents' divorce or separation, and then 7 life-giving remedies. But it's all caught up within the Catholic Church's teaching on redemptive suffering, which is kind of our last chapter. What is redemptive suffering? Because as much as we might work at healing, there might be some crosses we need to continue to bear. So what do you do with those crosses that remain, that continue? And that's where we talk a lot about the gift of the church giving us to redemptive suffering. So 7 different wounds, 7 different life-giving remedies is kind of what we look through in the book.
Wow. And just before I ask you about those, I just did a podcast with Dr. Dan Schneider, and he is the assistant to the exorcist Father Chad Ripperger. And so they have the Liber Christo Institute. And he wrote the book, The Liber Christo Method, which is the method to help, extract demons from your life and, full possession, get rid of that as well. Of course, you need a priest for that. But he talked as well about the power of redemptive suffering. And if we can learn to understand suffering, we won't be so quick to run from it, and let alone let it heal, let the blood drip on our wounds. And gosh, it's such in one sense, it's a deep subject. In another sense, it's like, wow, I guess I get that, what Jesus
Yeah,
did.
I mean, I think it's essential for Christians because Christ doesn't say, walk around your cross, go, it's optional, but he says,
Yeah.
no, pick up your cross and follow me. Like he's aware that there's going to be suffering, and his main mission was not to come to take away all suffering from this life, but rather to fill it with his presence, to transform it, and yes, to take it away in the next life. But in this life, he's really transforming that suffering for the good. He doesn't promise to take it all away, but he does promise to be present in all that suffering. And that's hence the need to unite it to his suffering and redemptive suffering. And that's such a key tenet because I think so many of us avoid suffering. We want to
Yeah.
anesthetize the suffering,
We complain about it.
complain about it, we run away
Mhm.
from it. Um, and we don't know how to deal with it in healthy ways. It outpaces our ability to cope in healthy ways or live virtuously. And so it's this unavoidable question in our life that we have to address.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we wanted to talk so much about redemptive suffering, and we bring this up all the time in our ministry as well, is being a child of divorce. It's one of those things that may not be fixed in this life.
Right.
It's a lifelong situation. Because we really stress that, and I know a lot of research has stressed this too, that when your parents divorce, it's not like it just happens at that time. Oh, the papers are signed. Okay, that's it. I mean, that's then going to affect a person's life throughout the rest of their life. So, really getting deep into what do we do with those sufferings that are maybe not going to be fixed? Maybe this will not be resolved in the way that we want it to. We're going to have to live with this. How do we do that with greater joy, with greater peace? Where is Jesus in the midst of that? I think that's a part of our book that could connect with anyone going through something similar. Of course, there's other sufferings in the realm of illness or of infertility or lots of other things that we're not going to get a fix to, and trying to find fixes sometimes makes the problem worse too. It just brings in bad coping mechanisms. And so anyway, so
Sure.
we really wanted to lean into that because it's such a gift that our church gives us, because we're not alone. We're not left to deal with these difficulties on our own. And what a gift that is as Christians, as Catholics.
Yeah. Well, so you said that's towards the end of the book. Let's start at the beginning. Are you able to go over some, or if you feel like, oh, because I know you can't go into the whole book. Like, what is one of the wounds that adult children of divorce really contend with?
Yeah, so I'll just name the wounds just briefly, and then we can, whatever Christine you feel called to go into. But the 7 wounds that we look at, and then the remedies to it, are what we call the wound of silence, the inability to grieve this wound, the wound to one's faith life and relationship to God. That's number 2. The wound to our identity is number 3. Number 4 is the wound to our pursuit of love, our vision of marriage. Wound number 5 is the wound to our emotional life and the wound of sin. They often go hand in hand. If our emotional lives are dysregulated, it can often lead to sin and sin wounds. 6 is the wound of unforgiveness. We talk a lot
Mm,
about how unforgiveness wounds us. I don't know if that's talked about enough. And then 7th is just the wound of unhealthy family dynamics. So, as Bethany said, the dysfunction remains after a parental divorce. You're always going between 2 homes. It comes up at all the holidays. So that's that ongoing nature And we talk about different ongoing aspects of the wound around the holidays, sibling relationships, step families, all the transitions that can occur in that last chapter. So those are kind of the 7 wounds we talk about. I don't know if there's a particular direction that
Oh, so we can just stay in the direction you wrote them. The first one is one I deal with all the time, in working with married couples or, divorced people, is silence. The best way that I articulate it is that it's the only time a child, when they are wounded, is not able to run to mommy and daddy to heal the wounds, because mommy and daddy are the perpetrators of the wounds. And therefore who do you talk to? You are forced to be silent and take it. And it's just the most horrible thing. Whenever you swallow poison, you need to go to the doctor and have them cut it out. But in the case of divorce, it is just wretched, because here, drink this poison and don't talk about it and don't extract it. Keep it there and let it fester.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. And I
wow.
mean, it's very possible that really nobody in a child of divorce's life is able to receive that wound. We talk in the book about divorce happy talk, and just some of the messages that children of divorce get, that like, well, this was for the best, your parents are happy, so you should be happy too. And we know people in our ministry that have been told things like, it's great, you get 2 Christmases, you
Oh, I
get,
don't want
you
two
have
Christmases,
more.
right?
Your family hasn't ended, it's expanded. All these type of sugarcoating what's actually going on, and the depth of the sadness and the grief. And then it just puts children, and I'm using the word children, but into adulthood, it can cause so much internal confusion about, like, is this even a suffering? Am I the one that's out of sync?
Yes.
Feel bad about this? I mean, there's so much that all the wounds that we talk about, I mean, they interrelate, because this wound of silence then, gets connected with a sense of identity, and, what is my problem? Like, that I'm not okay with this. So they all interconnect in a way, but absolutely, we want to just start with talking about the wound with silence, because it's just such a common experience. And without being able to acknowledge the hurt that has happened and really grieving it well, it's so hard to move forward with healing. And you just kind of can remain stuck in that place of not allowing yourself to feel all those sad
Yeah.
feelings.
Feel the feels.
Mhm.
Yeah. And acknowledge them.
Yeah, and we talk, the remedy to that is a life-giving grieving, that we do need to grieve. So while I did say at the outset that there's no one set of steps, everybody's healing is creative, we do consider it essential for healing to be able to grieve, to name the wounds, and to do it in perspective of faith, recovering the faith. So those 2 aspects, we need to invite Christ into the wounds. That's crucial for grieving. We need to grieve not just alone. Blessed are those who mourn. As the scriptures say, that's an invitation to communion in our grief. One
Yeah.
of the bad forms of grieving is when we isolate ourselves, and we think we're all alone in our suffering, and that's a lie. Christ is there with us, and we need to invite and proactively invite him into the wounds to grieve with us and those who love us. So we talk about what does good Christian grieving look like, and that's one of the aspects. Another one of the aspects is to grieve with hope. We need to acknowledge the wounds and the suffering, but Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4:13,
Hope
we
doesn't.
need to grieve with hope. Do not be like the pagans who just grieve, but grieve with hope. And here I would interpret this as, we don't want to allow our grief to get stuck in wallowing in a self pity, kind of stuck in this victim mentality, thinking things can never change for the better. I'm powerless to change these things, right? Like that's a lie. Even if there's certain things that are out of our control, with God's grace, we can transform it to something good. He promises us that, right? In Romans, that all things can be transformed to the good of God. And that doesn't mean minimizing the pain. So you have to hold both of those realities together, of both grieving and having hope. And we talk about what does that look like? And that's where our healing begins, is to kind
Yeah.
of balance that grief and hope.
Well, one thing I say, the Bible says, hope does not disappoint.
Mm.
Mhm.
You're not disappointed. And I'll have so many of my standers, right? And the stander will allow his or her children to pray for mommy and daddy's reconciliation. The prodigal will email them and text them and say, You're hurting our child by making them think we're getting back together and we never will. So tell them to stop praying for our reconciliation. Well, first of all, I'm like, well, that's not anger coming out because it's annoying you that your decision to leave your family is hurting your child, and you're seeing it in the prayer. And then when I coach my standers, I say, you know, remind your prodigal when they do say that, text them this. Well, Jesus says hope never disappoints. So even if that's true, it doesn't hurt our children to have the hope that it won't. And it's like, you know, because what do these prodigals do in that case? It's like, I'm not going to hurt our children because hope doesn't disappoint when it stays alive. But if you're discouraged and you're hopeless, that'll eat you alive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just to give a shout out, thank you to you and all your listeners who are standers. We make a point to recognize them in this book because we know that's a group that goes unnoticed, unrecognized, and these are people who have been divorced against their will, but are standing faithfully to their marriage vows as a witness to their children and to the world and to their abandoned spouse about the good of marriage and the hopes of conversion and reconciliation, but also just because of the good of their marriage vows that still exist that they are witnessing to. And I just want to say that's been a big part of my journey. And we made sure to mention that that's an incredible gift in our book of showing what marriage can look like, even in the worst of circumstances, that can still be fruitful and joyful when you have that meaning, you have that witness, and we even dedicated the book to a stander who's dear to us. So I just want to give a shout out to them because I see them, I see you divorced against will, but that is so fruitful. It's so fruitful for us children. It might not seem like it for a while, but it made all the difference in my life, my own healing journey, and others who I share about in this book. Um, to have that faithful witness to the wedding vows
Yeah.
despite the divorce. I mean
Gives you a
that's
little bit more peace because at least, you know, one of your parents is saying you're not wrong. It's okay. I'm grieving
right.
too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, like I think there's a fruitfulness of that witness. Obviously, I hope the fruitfulness leads to reconciliation and conversion. But um there was a real witness of fidelity in good times and bad, but here's the bad. That's really inspiring. That's
Yes.
really inspiring about what true fidelity is. And you know what? I've seen it in the lives of singers that yes, it's hard, they cry, it's difficult, but it brings joy too. And it gets at that paradox of suffering, you know, great suffering, but great joy when it's united to
Yeah.
God's will. And so, anyways, just want to give a big shout out to the standers. You're present in our book. I see you, we see you, and it's such a gift. You're such a gift.
Thank you. And I don't think it's an accident that we did the show today. 1/2 hour ago, I just received a message from one of my standers that she and her husband have reconciled. They just bought a house together, and he said to her, 2024 is our year. It's our year of reconciliation. It's our 20th
Uh,
anniversary. They've been apart for about 2 years. Yes, God bless them. So reconciliations do happen. Your hope is never in vain. So God bless you. And her child now is no longer going to be the child of divorce,
Mhm.
you know?
mm.
So
Yeah,
That's
praise
wonderful.
God.
yeah, yeah,
Praise God. Yeah, I mean, there might be still some wounds to work through, but
sure.
what a gift. What a gift
Mhm.
of grace and healing and in time that's going to bless those children and bless the spouses. And that's
Amen.
these type of stories need to be on the front page of news more. You don't hear enough
Yeah.
of these stories of reconciliation as possible. So thank you for that, Christine, sharing that. And um, I just have to give a shout out to our friend's book, Impossible Marriage is Redeemed by
Yeah.
Layla Miller.
Mhm.
I'm in that book.
I know.
My
That
story's in that
chronicle,
book.
yeah, it chronicles hopeful stories like that are possible even in the depths
Yeah.
of suffering. So
Yeah. My husband and I were separated for 4 years and we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So, you
That's awesome.
know, yes,
Praise
it
God.
does happen. And my daughter at 14 years old said to me, Mom, thanks for not divorcing Dad. Thank
mm,
Mhm.
you. She
mm,
literally just like, thanks. I'm so glad I have this intact family,
mm.
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know?
praise God.
So number 2 in your book was, I mean, I'm listening to you and going, oh yeah, I want to talk about that. Oh yeah, I want to talk about that. But it seemed like that is also probably the number 1 thing we see is that faith. God, why did you let this happen? If I'm not going to believe in God, talk about that, the wound of faith, and how do you heal that?
Yeah, I mean, so we tackle all these hard questions of, yeah, where was God when I was praying for my parents to be reconciled? The hypocrisy that can come, let's say, when your parents were both Christians, but they didn't lean into their Christian faith, or they didn't listen to their Christian faith and chose against it. Maybe you're hurt by church communities because there was priests, church officials, ministers encouraging the divorce when it shouldn't be, right? We tackle all those hard questions, but in addition to all of those issues, I mean, there can be questions about, okay, my dad abandoned the family. How can I call God the Father? Mom abandoned the family. How can I call the church mother? Things like that. So we get into all these difficult questions. I would just say at the most basic level, why it often becomes a crisis of faith. Well, two reasons. One, every question of suffering is a question directed to God. Like you said, why did this happen? So this is why you can't heal without spiritual healing. You can't. You can't. I mean, again, we try to integrate good psychological principles and healing, but you need the faith. You need the faith to heal. It's the deepest level of healing because of questions like this. Um, so we got to heal at every level and integrate it towards spiritual healing. But the second thing is we know the way God designed marriage is our parents are called to image Christ's love to the church. That's part of the vocation of marriage, part of the sacrament. And when that's not there, it does send a different image, a different message. So that is going to confuse the kid. That is going to cause problems in the faith because of the way God designed marriage. But the key to recovery is to see that the parents are always an image, right? Um, they are the mirror, but the statue, the reality remains, right? So even if the mirror is broken, the reality of God the Father's love, which all love is supposed to emulate, still remains. And so part of the healing is to know that, God's love so far surpasses all earthly love, especially our parents' love. But we can know that intellectually, but there's no way of knowing that in the heart
Yeah.
throughout without a consistent relationship with Christ. And when you just encourage people to try again with a relationship to Christ, because it makes all the difference in how you approach suffering, meaning, who God is, why does He allow us to suffer, and we tackle all those questions.
You did you come up with these questions on your own, or does this come up after years and years of doing these retreats, being a child of divorce yourself, and going, they always have these same 7 questions. Kind of tell us, how did those come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a process. By this point, we've been able to accompany over 1,000 adult children of divorce, and the weekends are pretty intense with the topics that we go into, and a lot of the things that we're just privileged to hear people's stories. So part of it was over time noticing, like, these like themes keep coming up again and again. We relied on a lot of the good research that's out there. Elizabeth Marquard was somebody that we draw on for the book. Judith Wallerstein has some great research of the long-term effects of divorce on children. So we definitely did our homework, looking at what are these research studies showing. Layla's book, Primal Loss, is really important too.
Yeah.
Not so much research, but just again, those stories and seeing the themes that come up. And then, from our education at the JP2 Institute, kind of having a really enriched sense of what does the church teach about marriage. Okay, well, given that, what will the fallout be if
The
marriage doesn't
marriage goes
last?
awry.
And you see that you hear that in people's stories, you see that in the research. I mean, part of it is, as faithful Catholics, we shouldn't be surprised that what the church teaches is actually true, because you can just see the impact that it has on
Yeah.
people's lives, when that vision of marriage is not lived out. So all of that. That's why I felt like just the ripe time to write this book. Not that we're done learning. I'm sure we'll learn so much more, but like we had enough to offer that really distilled what we've been privileged to see about this topic. And so others who maybe have not really talked in depth with an adult child of divorce, or maybe that's their own story and they never thought that, other people have gone through something similar. We wanted to put that all together. So it's there. It's there for people to read. It's there for leaders to read in a book format.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean, just to add to that, yeah, it comes from our pastoral experience of accompanying, but just also in the truth of the reality of marriage, what you were saying, but also just from my own personal journey, just to add to that, these are questions, a lot of them that I wrestled with personally,
Yeah.
so I kind of know intimately, and I know the difference that faith makes because I tried that. I tried to heal without faith, and it only gets you so far. So if there's this empty hole of you trying to heal and heal and heal, maybe it's finally time to embrace Jesus, embrace him fully, because a lot of children divorced, they're more likely to describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, meaning they have this amorphous relationship to God, but they're lacking the truth, the knowledge
Yeah.
that Christ wants to give, and the fullness of the sacraments. And so to go all in with Jesus is my um, my message to you, that if you feel like there's been a hole in this healing area, that's because there's another layer, there's a deeper layer, and to go all in with Jesus to heal.
I wanted to ask you, Bethany, if I remember correctly, your parents are still married. So
Right.
you are not the child of divorce, but you have married one and you have now helped these 1,000 people. What have you learned about this going, wow, wow. Or is it something you have seen can also apply to your life and with whatever wounds that you've had that were not divorce related? I mean, I'm sure they're very specific to divorce, but what's your learning been on this
Yeah,
trial by
so
fire?
my parents are still together, thanks be to God. They did separate twice when I was growing up, and I share about that in the book, and I talk about it as part of our
Mm,
ministry. Physically separated twice, but then did reconcile. So they're one of the stories that it can work out.
yeah.
They figured out a way. A lot of that was due to their strong faith. I really believe. So I think part of, when I first met Dan, got to know him. I mean, we share in the book one of our first longer conversations that we had. Dan shared with me, his background, being a child of divorce. Like it went pretty deep. I mean, Dan's a pretty deep guy. But it really struck me. I'm like, wow, like this man has really worked through a lot of this. He's discovered a lot of healing. There was both a sadness and a joy in sharing that. And then, as I got to know him, and now that we're married, it really it struck me in a very deep way how much of an ongoing wound being a child of divorce is. Because every time we go back to Dan's hometown, we're once again navigating the split families, different opinions about what happened, different opinions about what should be happening now vis-a-vis family relationships. It's not a thing that is ever really gonna not, I mean, again, not to lose hope, but in this particular situation, this is just something that we'll have to deal with. So that's been very eye-opening to me. I feel very privileged to have heard so many stories of people who are adult children of divorce being willing to share their stories. On the retreats, we give the talk about relationships, so we talk about our own marriage, we talk about helping each other heal. And that is a mutual thing. It's like when we got married, we took on each other's wounds in a way, and now we're healing together. We're receiving that from the Lord. Marriage is a sacrament of healing, a sacrament of community. So all of that. So yeah, I mean, as any human being, I have my own wounds and background, but they're not being adult child of divorce. And that's pretty distinctive that I don't have to deal with that in my family. And that's a pretty big difference. So it's eye-opening to me just to see the things that so many adult children of divorce have to go through that are completely heartbreaking and unjust. So we do this work together, and which is, I mean, a wonderful gift to be able to share out of our own marriage, with this work that we're doing.
And Bethany actually in the book offers her perspective as a non-ACOD, how we've healed in our marriage together as well, because it's very important to us. Again, God's called us to communion, and we have to heal as individuals, but we also have to heal together as spouses. So it's very important for us to give the spousal perspective in our book. So Bethany, every other chapter, gave that perspective of how, as a non-ACOD, we've worked on this and also worked on this as a couple together.
You have kids, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
We have
that's
two
true.
daughters. They're 4 and 6.
How has this work helped you to say, and I say this with all the greatest of respect, not only no, but oh, hell no, are we going to get divorced? You know, we're going to work through anything. I'm going to guess that that's got to be an attitude of yours, right?
Mhm.
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh,
I mean,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, divorce is not an option. We like the D word never comes
Mhm.
up in our conflicts or conversations ever, or any remote thoughts to that. But more than just not wanting to divorce, I mean, we really want to thrive. For
Mhm.
Bethany and I, it's about sanctity and thriving in holiness and happiness and joy is what we're after too, not just simply not divorcing. And I say that because um, that's a noble goal, not to divorce, but that's not the fullness, right? That's not the
Right.
fullness that God wants to
Yeah.
call your vocation to.
Mhm.
And again, sometimes adult children divorce can settle for that. And it's like, okay, that's
Mhm.
great. That's a very powerful motivator not to divorce, but God wants you to thrive. So if there are
Okay,
areas,
that you might have life and have it abundantly. Yeah.
yeah, and when I say thriving, it doesn't mean there's not suffering, there's crosses, there's conflict in our marriage, but you approach that as an opportunity for growth.
Mhm.
Um, so that's always been our mindset that every time there's a conflict, that there's a pain point, okay, we're going to work through this. We're going to talk about this, even when we don't want to, even when
Mhm.
we're tired, even when, um, okay, we were sharp the last time. We're going to try to do a little bit better this time, talking through these issues, and then try to grow from each one of it to be virtuous. And I would say this that yeah, it's just a whole different mindset growth. If you see marriage as for your sanctification, so it is about our happiness and joy, but it's also about our sanctification. Meaning, it is meant to be difficult at times to help us to grow. It is meant to have challenges so that we grow in holiness. Again, properly understood, there's a lot of joy and healing in marriage, but there are crosses. I think when we promise to be faithful to another one in good times and bad times, when we make that promise, it's not just to begrudgingly get through and persevere
Mhm.
the bad times. Christ knows that crosses, when united to Him and transformed with Him, lead to the growth.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's this understanding of marriage as sanctification.
Yeah.
So our mindset, and we say this in the book, is to have joy within growth. You have to hold both together. You got to see marriage as joyful, happy, holy, but also ordered towards growth. And when you have that expectation, which I think is God's expectations for marriage, you approach conflict just wholly different,
Yeah.
completely different.
So we went through two of the wounds. Which ones, because I know we won't have time to go through all seven, but which ones were you like you see the most often or you see the most gripping, I would say? Can you name the other five that's like, oh, I really want to talk about this one?
Uh, I think, well, yeah, I can name the other five just to recall, but there is one I want to talk about. The other ones are the wound to identity, the wound to our vision of marriage and pursuit of love, wound to emotional life and sin, wound of unforgiveness, and the wound of unhealthy family dynamics. I want to spend a moment here talking about the wound of unforgiveness because I don't know that this is always obvious to people. We could also spend a lot of time talking about the wound of unhealthy view of marriage, but the wound of unforgiveness, we don't realize the damage that unforgiveness does to ourselves, not just simply uh, to the other, um, but there's this wound that traps us in resentment, traps us in the past, makes it very hard to move beyond it, sucks all the life, adds extra tension to the suffering. You add to that the tension, TENSION, tension of holding on to this and not letting it go. Um, that people don't recognize that the way God made forgiveness is this 2-for-1 deal.
Yeah.
It's good for the other, but it's also good for you. Why is he so adamant in the gospel for mercy and for forgiveness? It's because it's good for both of you. So when he challenges us to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, there's a connection, right, to receiving our own forgiveness and giving it to others. Um, so there's a real wound when we don't offer forgiveness. But we don't offer forgiveness because there's also a lot of misconceptions. Okay, forgiveness doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't give the other person the right to continue to hurt us, to continue to sin against us.
Doesn't mean you have to forget
It doesn't mean
what
you
they
have to
did.
forget.
Doesn't mean you have to hang out and have a relationship with them.
Right, if it's unsafe to do so. Although,
Right.
I mean, forgiveness is ordered towards a relationship to some degree, right? Maybe it's just simply prayer for that person. If
It
it's
is, but I think about people who are sexually abused or
right,
physically
right,
abused. And so I'm going to
absolutely.
forgive you. I'm not going to hang out with you, or your offender's dead.
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
it
So
doesn't have.
reconciliation's different than forgiveness. That's right. It's
Right,
different.
right.
Forgiveness is the work of our hearts with God's mercy to forgive the harm that's been done to us and to slowly let go of the harm, the anger. That's why I like talking about letting it go versus forgetting. You may
Hmm.
never forget, but the Lord does want you little by little to let that
Let
go
it go.
through
Let it go.
in a proper way, not a Disney fluffy way. It's hard work, and that's also why it's a process. I mean, that's another thing we talk about. Forgiveness is a habit of the heart, and it takes time to cultivate, to let go of the anger and hurt.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out because I don't think there's any way to heal around forgiveness. So it's one of those
Mm.
essential
For
uh,
everyone.
aspects. And for me, it was actually the beginning of my healing journey. For a lot of people, it comes a lot later. But I always have been kind of aware of the wound and was grieving it, although in unhealthy ways in high school for sure. I coped in bad ways, but for me, it was a retreat, and I just had this insight that I was withholding forgiveness, in particular from my father, and I confessed that in confessional, and it was just so healing. It was so healing to receive that knowledge, and the priest was so good. We had a long conversation about forgiveness that really changed my life. And he told me, he's like, "Look, this is not the last time you're gonna have to forgive. It's a virtue. You're gonna have to pray for divine mercy." He told me about the divine mercy chaplet. I had never heard about that. The need to pray for God's divine mercy to pass through my freedom to offer it to other, because it's heroic work. Okay, because you're offering forgiveness before they say I'm sorry. They may or may
Hmm.
not make amends. Okay, this stuff is heroic, saintly stuff. That's uniquely Christian, by the way. The world had never heard of unilateral forgiveness until Christ came along and said, "Love your enemies, even while they're, forgive them, even while
Yeah.
they're still sinners."
Still sinning against you.
I mean, this is radical stuff, but why did he do that? Because he knew it wasn't just good for the other, but it's good for you too. Now, if you're
Well,
gonna,
and it's what he's doing for us.
that's what he's doing
I'm going to
for us.
forgive
We're
you
also
while you're still
recipients.
offending me.
That's right. We're recipients of this unmerited forgiveness even before we turn to him. And that's why I think Our Father also starts with us receiving forgiveness, and then only then can we pass it to others. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That we have to receive it first
Hmm.
to be able to give it to others. And that's the other big thing is to offer forgiveness to others, we need to receive God's forgiveness first about all the ways we came up short, or maybe we reacted to this wound in sinful ways. We have to take responsibility for that, not simply blame others for that, for those problems and how we reacted. We're not responsible for the first wound, but the way we respond to it, we are responsible for that. And so, yeah, I just want to say that I think forgiveness is one of the most difficult, but
But the
essential
most
steps.
essential.
Yeah, to
No,
free
so
up.
that one would seem obvious to me, right? Forgiveness seems obvious, and the identity seems obvious to me. Maybe that's not obvious to everyone, and maybe the questioning what is marriage. Which one of those seven, though, did you kind of go by? Huh? Oh, yeah, it's obvious. I should have seen it, but I didn't see it until we started seeing these patterns. And again, maybe Bethany, since you're not a child of divorce, maybe you're the one that was going, huh? I didn't see that, but now it makes sense. All these people are. Is there any one of the seven wounds that really kind of struck you that way?
Um, I would say when we started looking a little bit more at the effect being a child of divorce has on your anxiety levels, that was really eye-opening for me. when we talk in the book about just a fairly common thing that research has shown that children of divorce tend to just be more generally anxious. We kind of distinguish that between like an anxiety disorder that can be diagnosed. We're talking more about just a general sense that, even when things are going well, I don't always feel at ease. I always feel like the other shoe is going to drop. I'm just not quite comfortable, just kind of always having kind of that tinge of anxiety to everything, coming a lot from having your parents divorce, having your stability wrecked, and that for a
Yeah.
lot of kids that came out of nowhere. Like the parents are very well aware of all the things that are going wrong in their relationship, but kids are not. I mean, I just think of our kids. They're very self-focused, in a good kid way. And that's the story of a lot of children of divorce, depending on when their parents divorce. It could have just been a total shock out of the blue that now their world is crumbling apart. So we talk a lot about anxiety and then talk about anger also, which I thought that too, like I appreciated kind of thinking through what is the role of anger. I mean, there's a just sense of anger, there's a righteous anger. But then when does anger become a sin? Because anger can also be a sin. And how do we express that anger in ways that are not going to hurt us or other people further? So some of that, I think, thinking through just the emotional impact beyond the very, a lot of people get that children of divorce are probably more likely to be sad, but some of those other emotions I thought were a little bit more, if not surprising, worthwhile to kind of parse out. That might be a little something that people don't think of as much.
And I just want to add to this. It's interesting because we were just talking to one of our board members yesterday, and he cited this fascinating study that the country in the world that struggles the most with anxiety, that has the highest anxiety scores in the world, is the United States. And yet we don't have massive poverty. We don't have a war going on. We don't have these, all these things that would produce anxiety, but yet we have super high anxiety. I think what's driving it um, is this relational brokenness that it leads to fear. And the fear is not just simply the fear of marriage, although that's huge, but it's all aspects. Fear in the capacity of oneself, fear that friends will stay, let alone somebody I date, fear that the shoe's going to drop. That and fear not just when things are going bad, but also while they're going good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
While they're
not
going
permanent.
good, there's a distrust of joy, a distrust of good. And we need to replace that fear, again, to come back to our starting point, with hope. We can't live locked in this fear. And I think that's a predominant emotion of children of divorce. And the whole book is geared towards alleviating that fear. So I would agree with Bethany. I think that was something that even surprised me, was just the deep amount of fear, not just towards marriage, but and dating,
Everything.
all
Yeah.
aspects,
Nothing's
all aspects.
permanent.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I teach anger management. And so I think one of the things I learned first is so many people think anger is a bad thing.
Mhm.
It's so one of the things I want to dispel is anger is not a bad thing at all. I mean, like you said, it can, depending on how we use it. But anger, this is kind of what I'm hearing you leading to too. Anger is a secondary emotion. Anger comes out when the primary emotion, the one that we're uncomfortable with, or we can't name it, or we haven't identified it. And that's what this is digging out is, okay, so what are the primary emotions that anger is coming up? It's the fear, the distrust, the sadness, the grief, and so having them see, okay, let's deal with the anger. Now what's underneath it? And then when you can name the enemy, then you can heal.
Yeah, yeah. The
Now I
anger
know what my enemy
often
looks like.
often masking a more tender emotion that's underneath. So yeah, I mean, we try to integrate a lot of good psychological principles in our book, not being primarily a psychological book, but just that sense. I know, like one of our the therapists that we work with in LifeGiving Wounds has this great line of just be really curious about your emotions. Like when you feel anger, get curious about that. Like, why am I angry about this? And, where is it justified? Okay. Again, anger can be justified. The injustice that children of divorce experience by losing their family stability, that's worth being angry about. But then often
Right.
kind of a clue of like, okay, where else am I in need of healing? Where's the Lord trying to nudge me through this strong emotion that I feel? We feel our emotions. We're not responsible for those initial feelings, but then taking that next step, what do I do with this anger? Am I going to feed it? which ends up just leading to resentment and bitterness and all these things that even on a physical level, they're starting to see that having a kind of an unmitigated anger is bad for us physically, emotionally,
Oh,
mentally,
yeah.
all these things.
Yeah.
But then even if anger is the only thing that we're ever allowing ourselves to feel, we're not getting at those deeper places of
That's
that,
right.
abandonment, the sadness, the grief, which is harder to go into in some sense,
Yeah.
because it's hard to
You have to look at the
be
monster.
the recipient of realizing like, yeah, this was a really sad thing that happened to me. So definitely getting at those emotions. I mean, there's so much more, like we've talked throughout this interview, the sense of faith and a person's sense of identity and all of that. But of course all this stuff is important. The emotions.
And it all ties together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why, can you hold up your book one more time? I want all of you, whether you are the adult child of divorce or not, to get your hands on this book, Life-Giving Wounds, a Catholic guide to healing for adult children of divorce or separation. But I'm going to argue, if you are struggling with healing any wound, you look in there because the remedies are the same. The remedies are the same if you're feeling the same, type of wound. And I think that needs to get into the hands of a lot of people, especially as you just said, in America, because we've got so much brokenness here. And but God has used you guys as instruments to help heal. I mean, so, praise God. And it wouldn't have happened had your parents not divorced. Not that we're happy that they divorced, but God took out of that brokenness. Scar tissue is so much stronger than regular tissue. And I'm grateful for that. Where can people get your book?
They can go to nationspress.com. They can go to amazon.com. They can go to lifegivingwounds.org. Uh, I think Amazon's sold out right now. So if you go
Awesome.
to lifegivingwounds.org or nationspress.com, that would probably be the best place for them.
And we, again, will have a link
Bookstores
right
too.
here.
Yeah,
What was that?
for people who still like to go into bookstores and browse.
Oh, I love going
We
into
be in a lot of
bookstores.
Catholic bookstores. But
Catholic Christian
it's
bookstores.
fun when people in our Life Giving Wounds community text us pictures of, hey, I saw your book in Wisconsin or Kansas or wherever. That's always pretty fun.
Yes. Yes. And so one more time, if they want to attend the retreat, go where?
Lifegivingwounds.org. Click the retreat tabs, upcoming retreats across the USA. There's also, if you click the About tab, you can see all the different chapters and be connected to one of the chapters nearest to you.
Excellent. All right, both of you, answer this question individually. Name one thing you'll have our listeners do differently as a result of something they heard today.
Well, just seek healing for fear and anxiety. Don't settle, since that was one of the themes, that hope and peace is possible, and there's likely a wound that's undergirding it. So to get that healing from those relational wounds we have in our life, and to have hope that not just can you get healing, but God can transform this to be a resource for your life and for the good of others. Just like you said, Christine, about how I'm not happy that I went through my parents' divorce, but the Lord has used it to bring about many good things. My marriage, this ministry, healing others. So just to heal that wound, so it becomes a resource for yourself and for others.
Amen. Bethany.
I would say for listeners who are adult children of divorce, having the courage, finding the courage, receiving that from the Lord to examine that a little more closely. A lot of people have, but a lot of people have not. So looking at that, just a little bit more, like where do you want me to heal, Lord? Where's your healing for me? And then if you're not an adult child of divorce, undoubtedly you know somebody who is. So just have that extra openness. If it comes up in conversation, explore that a little bit. I think that's a big gift that all of us can give to our friends and family who are adult children of divorce, is having that openness. Being our book can give some kind of insights and topics to possibly discuss, to help the people in our life who have that in their story.
Which sadly is at least 50% of the people that you're associating with.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So
it's not a niche issue. Sometimes I hear about that, but this is central for our day. If we want to heal the culture, we've got to heal these relational wounds.
it's a good place to take us off the air, you guys. please go to their website, lifegivingwounds.org. Please get the book. We've got things that need to be healed, and then you can go out and, help your brothers and sisters get healed as well. But, start with yourself. Let's get yourself healed. I would love for you to share this show with anyone that you think could benefit from the book, from the ministry, and also let them know about Breakfast with Bacon. God brings me amazing guests and various topics, and we are really out there to save souls, get people into heaven, and I'll need your help to do that. So sign up for my newsletter, go like and subscribe here on this channel, as well as Rumble, as well as Instagram and Facebook. And I'm just honored for you to follow me, follow and share. So you guys, how I end the show, because you've done this before. You're expert, right? You got this. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life
Sunny side
side
up.
up.
Yes.